Hello and welcome to lesson 4 of week 12. In this lesson, we are going to look at loops in Python. My name is Mildred. In Python, we can execute a block of code or a statement as long as the condition is true. And for this, we use a statement called the while statement, written while, like this. And how do we use a while statement? Let's say we want to print out the numbers 0 to 9. I'll declare a variable called x, and I'll say x is equal to 0. And I want to put a condition and say while x is less than 10, I want to do something. I want to say print x is currently what the value of x is, and then I want to increment x by 1. Now recall that when we did the topic operators, we say if we want to write x is equal to x plus 1, so x is equal to x plus 1, it is exactly the same thing as saying x plus equal 1. X is equal to x minus 1 is x minus equal 1. X is equal to x times 1, x times equal 1. So go back to your lessons on operator to refresh your memory on this operator. Now the reason we have to increment is that if you do not increment, you have an infinite loop that will crash your browser. So what we are saying here is the current value of x is 0. We want to put a condition is as long as x is less than 10, print out f x is currently and then the value of x. Then increment x by 1, which means add 1 to the current value of x. So it will be 0 plus 1, which is 1. It checks the condition again. Is 1 less than 10? It prints out the current value of x is 1. 1 is not less than 10, it prints it out. It increments, add 1 to it, it becomes 2. When it gets to 10, is 10 less than 10? No, it stops printing. Execution stops. And when I run this, we are going to have x is currently 0, x is currently 1, x is currently 2, down to x is currently 9. It stops because 9 is the only value less than 10. When we get to 10, it is now equal. It evaluates to false, and so it doesn't print out. While you use the while statement, you can also use the else statement. Let's say else, and when we say else, we want to say all done, something like this, print out all done. And when I clear this and I run, we say all done at the end. So execute everything in the loop and then print out all done with an else statement. So when we use if, we can use else. When we use the while statement, we can use an else like this. We can also use something called the continue if we want to skip a particular number. Let's say x is equal to 0. While x is less than 10, we want to increment x first. And so I'll say x plus equal 1. And then the next thing I want to do is say if x is equal to, we want to skip the number 5. We'll say if x is equal to 5, we want to continue. What this means is that we want it to skip the execution of x is currently 5, so we should not see that when we print. So then when I clear and I run, I have all done. That I did not put what it should do. We did not ask it to print out. So let's say while x is less than 10, right, we want to say print x is currently this, increment x, if x is equal to 5, continue. 5 is not skipped, so we want to put the print statement. So this is where you want to be careful and use the logic. So we want to say we want to continue before we print. And so when I clear and I run, this time it is fixed. So you want to know the order of things, and we skip 5. So the first thing is you declare the current value of x. Then you put your condition. While x is less than 10, you want to increment x by 1. So this time, because we are incrementing before we print, now notice I'm incrementing before I print, which means that x becomes 1 before it even sees the print statement. So I'm never going to print 0. I'll be printing number 1 to 10. X becomes 1 before it meets the print statement. So we start while x is less than 10, increment x. If the value of x is 5, continue, which means keep that value and print x is currently this, else print all done. This is just at the end. So it prints 1, 2. So the first one, it prints 1, it prints 2. And notice that it prints 1 to 10 and not 0 to 9 like previously. So take your time to study this structure. It is not difficult, but it requires a level of logical reasoning for you to be able to interpret the flow of things or the algorithm. And that is why I did it this way, for you to see that when things are placed wrongly, your output will be totally different. So you want to logically reason it and say, this is here because you want to have an initial value. This is here because you want to have a condition checking the initial value. What do you want to do when you meet the condition is true? Do you want to print? Do you want to skip? So all of that logic comes after the while statement. What do you want to do after the while block is done? Do you want to use an else statement to print out something, or you just want to skip out the else statement? We have another type of loop in Python called the for loop. Now we use for loop to iterate through sequences, and when we say sequence, we mean all the collection type that we have seen, including strings. So let's say we have a list, for instance, a list of people, and these people have the name Jane, John, Jennifer, Jeremiah. And let's say we have age, and this age we're going to give them the ages of these people. For the for loop, it's just a simple syntax. You get an iterator, and let's say we want I to be an iterator. For I in people, we want to do something. We want to print I, which means we want to loop through the people list and print out each value. So when I clear and I run, I'm going to be printing out each of the value in the people. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. If this was a tuple, we'll just call the tuple variable for I in tuple. If it was a dictionary, it's exactly the same way. If it was a set, it's exactly the same way. We're going to loop through. If it's a string, let's say for I in people, so now we're not talking about the people variable, but we are declaring a people string. It's going to print out P, then E, then O, then P, then L, then E. Let's try that. So you can actually say for I in people, it will spell it out letter by letter. So we loop through sequences and the collection types like that. In the for loop, we can also use else like we did in the while loop. I'm not going to illustrate that, but you can try that out if you want to. If, for instance, we say we want this to stop execution the very moment it meets the name John. So we can say for I in people, for instance, let me delete this. So I'll do people here. So for I in people, I want to say if, or let me print I first, and then I'll say if I is equal to John, we want it to do something. We want it to break, which means that it will stop printing. And then let's use an else statement here. Else, we want it to say this is the end of the list. So once it jumps out of the execution, once it meets John. So in this kind of scenario, you want to say I have a list, but I want to check if the list has this particular name. Once it meets that name, stop printing out. And so what this will do, it will print Jane, John, and stop, because it has hit John. Break means break out of the loop. Okay, so when I clear this and I run, I'm going to have Jane and John. Stop executing, because the command is when you meet John, stop. So this is how we break out of a loop in Python. Let's say we are not using the list, and let's say we just want to print out the number 0 to 9. I think we did this earlier. And if we want to say we want to print out, okay, let's try this suggestion for I in range of the length of people, which means that we want to print out people I and age I. So we're trying to interpolate these two, where to print out the person and the age. So what this structure is trying to do, and there are several ways to do this. Now I want to print Jane 23, John 24, Jennifer 25, Jeremiah 26. So we can use for I in. We have the range function that we use. And what is the range? If we can count this 1, 2, 3, 4, it is 4. We can say for I in range 4, which means it's going to happen 4 times because there are 4 items. But because we don't know how many items in advance, we are assuming that we are getting records from the database. We want to use the len method to get the length of the item, and the length of the item is the length of people, right? So for I in range, length of people, which is the number that we just put, and we just decided that it is better to use the length of people so it can be dynamic, we want to print it. And when I clear this and I run, I'm going to get Jane 23, John 24, Jennifer 25, Jeremiah 26. There is another way we can do this. We have something called the zip function, like this, zip. And what you do is when you use the zip, you are going to zip these two together in a tuple. Now what the zip does, it returns an iterator of tuples where the first item in each is paired together, the second is paired together, third and the fourth the same thing. But if they are not of the same length, the two lists, they're not of the same length, then the list with the shorter length will decide the length of the new iterator. So if the shorter length is 3, that will decide the length of the new iterator. And so that is how the zip works. So let's try to use the zip so that you can see how it works. Let's say I want to print Jane is 23 years old. So what I can do is now say for people, let's say for people age, in zip people age, I want to print, I won't print it this way, I want to just print Jane, so this will be people, and I'll use the format string F. So I'll say people is age years old. So what I've done here is to dynamically print. So it will look at people age, which means I've zipped people and age. So it will take the combination of them as a tuple. So it will now say Jane is 23 years old, John is 24 years old. So that is what this is going to do. And when I clear here and I run, and then you see Jane is 23 years old, John is 24 years old, Jennifer is 25, Jeremiah is 26. So, and that is why you need to practice, because there are several ways to do one thing. Some are significantly faster. At some point I'm going to show you how to time it and see the amount of time it takes to execute a particular function, and you want to optimize your code so that it's significantly fast. You don't want to create a kind of loop that creates optimization problems. So this is one way of interpolating lists, and we have looked at how to loop through a list. We have looked at how to use the for and use an else. We have looked at how to break out of execution of a list. What you need to do next is to keep practicing for you to really understand this. Let's refresh our memory on the range function. Let's say I want to print out the numbers 0 to 9, and I want to say for I in range, 0 to 9 means 10 numbers, right? So it's 10. Range starts from 0, so it's always programmed to start from 0. So when I print I, it's going to print from 0 to 9 like this. You have to understand the range function because it's something that you really need in software development. So range means 10 numbers, which means the numbers 0 to 9. It starts from 0. But in the event you don't want to start from 0, you can put a start point, which is 1, and end at the end point, which is 10, like that. And when I clear here and run, you will see that it starts at 1, it ends at 9. The stop point is always exclusive. Now, always take note that most of the time, you always see the ending is always exclusive. So we're printing 1 to 9. And so if you want to print 1 to 10, you have to make this 11. And then when I run, you will now see that this is now 1 to 10. If I want to say, I want to print 1 to 10, but I want to skip by 2, like that. And so when I clear and I run, so you can put a step because it increments by 1. But now I want it to increment by 2. So I'm going to have only odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. If I want to have only even numbers, think out the logic so that you will have it well thought through. Logic is very important, and one way when I started, the fastest way to get the logic out is to write it out in plain English, in your language, in whatever you understand. Write out an algorithm. What do I want to do? Write out the steps in English and try to interpret the steps in, okay, how do I do this step in Python? How do I do that step in Python? You write it out as long and as ugly as the code looks, then you begin to optimize your code and look for better methods and functions that handles those algorithms better. And this brings us to the end of week 12. Next week, we are going to look at functions in Python. Thank you and see you next week.